There is one primary thing that holds people back from becoming who they want to be more than anything else. It's so simple. It's so odd. And so in this video, I'm going to share with you that one thing that is literally holding you back from being deeply honest with yourself and for becoming your desired future self. So the number one reason why you're not creating the life you want, or that you're kind of stuck in a hamster wheel way of living, is because you are so worried about what the people in your past think about you. You've showed up a certain way. And what's very true is that you're not the same person you were in the past. You've evolved, you've grown. Even in the last 3, 6, 12 months, you're not the same person you were. You're definitely not the same person you were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Yet, even still, there are people who knew you very deeply and very intimately and who had experiences with you and who saw you a certain way. And you're actually, and this is very deeply subconscious, you're afraid of becoming the greatest, best version of yourself, the truest expression of yourself, because it's too uncomfortable for you to be seen differently than you've been seen in the past. This can even be true in relationships. For example, if you're married with your spouse and you have this deep inside truth about you that you want to be your desired future self, but you've been a certain way in, for example, your marriage or with your friends or with your coworkers or in your job or just in your life, and you're too scared to show up as the person you truly desire to be. And so you continue showing up with the person you have been. Dr. Joe Dispenza would call this a past-present operation or orientation towards life, where you're letting the past dictate who you are in the present, and you're striving to be consistent with who you've been in the present. And you're overly worried, overly fearful about people's projections of you and perceptions of you. Now, here's a very fascinating and very powerful truth, is that you actually, to the extent you don't know who your future self will exactly be. You get better and better at visualizing your future self, at asking for things that you specifically want, at seeing, thinking, believing in, and eventually knowing where your identity shifts. But as you take steps towards your future self, your view of your future self will expand. As you start to embrace what you genuinely believe and what you want most deeply, and you stop worrying about how others will receive it. You stop worrying that those around you are going to be utterly shocked and confused by who you're becoming. Once you just let all of that go. I love the quote from Jim Rohn. He says, it's better to express than to impress. Once you just get to the point where you're just expressing yourself honestly, expressing yourself genuinely, and trying to just convey, get across, and to understand, versus worrying about how it's received, worried about how it's accepted, trying to impress other people. Once you just fully let all that go, you stop worrying, especially what the people in your past think about you and what they're going to think about who you're going to be. Once you can let that go, all of a sudden, 98% of the noise that's keeping you in your habitual patterns goes away. Once you start being honest with yourself, honest with God, honest with other people, honest with who you want to be, then you can let go of who you've been. And it's okay how dramatically different or nonlinear it is compared to who you have been. You can start to imagine your desired future self, and you can start being that person now. And it can be truly radically different from the person you were in the past. And that is okay. You have no worry about the opinions of other people about who you're being or what you're doing versus who you were in the past. It may be completely unfathomable to them, but they're entitled to their own opinions. This is something I love about what Wayne Dyer says. He says that people are entitled to their opinions of you, and it doesn't really matter what their opinions are of you. People's projections or opinions of you do not define you. You actually are the one who define who you are and what you do. You get to define yourself and your life. And so as you start to be a lot more honest with yourself, a lot more honest with your relationship with God, and a lot more honest with where you want your future self to be, you'll start to realize, and this is something that the research shows, is that your future self is far different than you expect. There's kind of a tussle in concepts between what's called teleology, which is living from a goal-oriented perspective. This is what Aristotle believed, and this is what a lot of the science shows, is that as human beings, we are driven by our goals. But at the same time, there's a concept that's more flexible, psychological flexibility and anti-fragility, which shows that yes, you may be driven by your views of the future, but as you take 2 or 3 steps forward, your views of the future are going to change, because your future self is going to know a lot of things that you don't know right now, because they're going to have experiences, perspectives, wisdoms that you don't have. And so as you take steps forward, your then view of the future will change, thus leading you in a nonlinear, different direction than you're currently going. But even still, you have a direction, you have a vision, you have desires. And so as you're walking in that direction, you will expand, you'll be open, and then your perspective will continually adjust and evolve. And you can then adjust and flexibly evolve your your vision of your future self as well. And so as you continue to take steps forward, you're going to continuously be stretching, expanding, and going in different directions than right now you can predict. What that means is that even if you have a clear and vivid view of your future self, which you're moving towards, which you can and absolutely should, and you get clear on your desires, ask and you shall receive, you move forward towards those desires, you think about those things, you visualize those things, and you move towards those things. But as you do, you will experience changes in who you are, such that what you want in the future and what you're striving for and what you value is completely outside the reference frame of your current self. And so what this means is that even though it's great to be clear and to move toward your desired future self and to be honest about your future self, that even still a few future selves, a few iterations beyond what you're currently imagining is something you don't really know. And again, this is what the research bears is that your future self is much different than you expect. And this is something that people have a hard time grappling with, is that who you're going to become in the future, you don't know who that is going to be. You can have a view, like let's just say you're at A right now, and you're working towards a future self or moving towards a future self that's at B or C. But once you get there, you're going to see a future self that's totally different, that's going to take you to different destinations, and you don't know where those are from here because you just simply can't see it. You can't comprehend it. And so this is a scary yet deep truth, is that you can't know at the deepest level who your future self is going to be. But as you move towards it and as you're increasingly honest with yourself, I like the notion of Michelangelo, who created the David statue, when he was talking to the Pope. And the Pope asked him, what's the genius of how you created the David statue? And he said, I simply stripped away, or I took away everything that was not David. So as you're moving more honestly towards your desired future self, you will then become more and more able to be honest, getting to the core of who you are. And it's going to be far deeper, far more powerful than you can comprehend. And you can start to get glimpses of it. Your future self can send you signals and messages. And as you start to become increasingly honest with yourself and stop worrying about how other people will receive it, genuinely, what other people think about you is none of your business. There's no reason to stop yourself from being the person you want to be and from living the life you want simply because you're afraid of how other people will receive it or interpret it, or how shocking or confusing it will be to them, how different you are from the person you are. Truly does not matter. Again, seek to express, not to impress. You can't control other people's projections or opinions, and the principle of consistency is what holds people back, striving to be consistent with who you've been in the past. You don't need to do that. You can just be who you are, be who you want to be. And as you do that, you're going to continue to clarify, evolve, and expand in your views and your vision, and what you can be and do and have is going to radically humble you. You're going to become increasingly humbled by the clarity and by the specificity of what comes. Just as an example, there's no way that a year ago I could have had any, I certainly had inklings. We all can have inklings, but the vision I have for my future self right now and the things I'm working towards, the things I'm pondering, visualizing, and actively growing into, even 3, 6, 12 months ago, I could not have even imagined what I'm now receiving and accepting into my life. Key point here, key takeaway, is that your fear of how people are going to interpret who you're becoming is the thing stopping you more than anything else. And that if you can reach a point, which you can do literally this instant and second, being a lot more honest with yourself, and then no longer needing to worry or control or even strive to, because you can't control other people's projections or opinions of you. They're theirs. And you no longer need to play that game. You no longer need to worry about that. Instead, you can just live in a state of acceptance and love for all people, and you just move forward. And you just be who you're going to be and continue to clarify and create and expand your vision of what you most deeply want. And as you do that, you're going to continually be humbled and inspired by what comes next and what you can create and what you can do, what your vision is. Dan Sullivan actually has a concept I really love, and he calls it the 4 freedoms, which is freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationship, and freedom of purpose. And this is something he teaches high-level entrepreneurs in his strategic coach program. And by the way, I wrote about it in deep depth in this book, 10X is Easier Than 2X, which comes out in May. This is the 3rd book in a trilogy I wrote with Dan Sullivan. The main idea here is that entrepreneurs and people in general seek freedom. And freedom is mostly an internal thing, although we think of it as external. The deeper you go into freedom, the more you realize that you can have all the external freedoms in the world, yet still not be free. And if you're not free, what that means is that you're not doing what you want. You're in a self-imposed internal prison because you're either worried about people's opinions, you're worried about failure. You've created all these self-imposing factors as to why you can't be, do, and have what you want. And so the first freedom is ultimately owning your freedom of time, that you actually control your time. Time doesn't control you. Time is internal and it's subjective and it's qualitative. It's not external. It is very individual. Your time is individual. And so as you continuously own your freedom of time and use your time in valuable ways which you desire, you'll get more and more time, which will then allow you freedom of money, what Dan Sullivan calls freedom of money, which is receiving money, having money, and ultimately making money in qualitatively better ways, the ways that bring you enjoyment, things that resonate with your soul, where you're getting paid more and more for your deepest, what Dan would call unique ability, or your just true essence, your gifts, your abilities, your desires that you want to not only send forth, but to stretch and expand. That then leads to increasing freedom of relationship, where you're getting better and better at what you do and becoming useful to more and more people, and you're getting access to people to learn from, to work with. It reminds me of the quote, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, but not just that, the ability to work with and collaborate with people who inspire you or who you want to work with or who you want to contribute to. Dr. Robert Keegan, who is a Harvard psychologist, or he had a 3-step model. And this 3-step model is powerful. It's beautiful. And it's very similar to Stephen Covey's 3-step model, which he teaches in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The simple model from Stephen Covey is you go from dependent as a person, where you're overly dependent on other people's opinions. This is like high school kids who are essentially chameleons trying to just fit in. And that's a very fear-based way. So you go from dependent to independent, where you're actually authoring yourself and you're comfortable with yourself and you're no longer needing to overly edit yourself to fit in. And this is where most people stop. And this is also where most organizations stop. There's actually a great book called Tribal Leadership. And in that book, they talk about organizational cultures or tribal cultures. And in that book, they would call this stage 3 tribal culture. And this is a competitive level. This is where you're competing with other people. This is where you're only worried about yourself, your own agenda. And this is what independence is. And then there's this higher level, which is interdependence. And going back to Dr. Robert Keegan, he has a more nuanced, developed, beautiful model of this. He calls the bottom stage the socializing self. And this is where you're really trying to fit in, trying to connect, trying to be accepted. And you're not being truly deeply honest with everyone about who you are. You don't even know really how to be fully honest with yourself. You're mostly just trying to be accepted. And you're willing to do anything and everything to be accepted. The next level up from that is what Keegan would call the authoring self stage, or self-authoring. And this is where you do start to develop your own perspective, your own worldview, your own goals. And one challenge of this view is that you can't actually see beyond your own worldview. You actually think that your view of the world is objective, and you think that it's accurate, and everything you do is to validate your own perspectives, but it's also to get to, everything is a means to your ends. Dr. Keegan says that probably 98 to 95% of people never go beyond this stage, where they have their own view and everything's ultimately about them. And their ability to grow and transform is limited because they're essentially just going through cycles of continuously repeating themselves, but also affirming their own view. So the highest view, which Keegan calls the transforming self stage, is very, very rare, but essentially this is where people who do have their own goals, their own views, their own perspectives come together for collaboration, where the whole becomes different from the sum of the parts, where you're all coming together to create something that is unpredictably better than any of you could do on your own. You know that the future is going to be better, but you also know that you can't predict. It's kind of like chemistry. You can't predict the amalgamation. You can't predict what ways the whole will change. And so this is a very transformational, collaborative chemistry form of operating. And this is something I've experienced. When I first started learning about entrepreneurship, I was doing my PhD at Clemson, and I was studying entrepreneurial courage, and I was studying entrepreneurship. This was back in 2015, before I became an entrepreneur. This is also when I was first starting to blog online and being interested in becoming a professional author and entrepreneur. And I started reading Dan Sullivan's work. Dan Sullivan is one of the smartest entrepreneurial thinkers. And I then had a desire to eventually start collaborating with Dan. And so that led, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And when the why is strong enough, you'll find the how. That's pathways thinking. And ultimately that led me to developing a collaboration with him. And we've now written a trilogy of books that have reached hundreds of thousands of people. But the only reason I'm sharing this, from a transforming self stage, I could not have predicted a lot of the changes that would have occurred through that collaboration. And so collaboration is a very powerful thing. All of this is to simply say, going back to the beginning, you can't fully predict who your future self is going to be. You can have a clear vision right now and work towards that. And as you take steps forward, part of being anti-fragile is adjusting the vision and not being so fixed on a single path that your past self made. You can also be committed yet unattached at the same time, which is a beautiful place to be. You're not attached to any of the pathways or methods of getting there. You're committed, but you also are flexible enough to readjust certainly the path, but also readjust the goal once you have better information. That's being anti-fragile. But also, the thing that is stopping you more than anything else from having, being, doing, and having brilliant, powerful, beautiful things is that you're still worried about what those around you or what those on your social media feeds, how they're going to receive. And the truth is you can't. You can't control it, and it really doesn't matter. And once you free yourself from that, there are two levels of freedom. There is freedom from, and then there is freedom to. Freedom from means you actually free yourself from things. You can free yourself from ignorance, from poverty, etc. But once you free yourself from the worry, the fear, the concern of what other people think about you, truly, and how they're going to respond and act to the choices you make, the direction you decide to go with your future self, then you're at the higher level, which is internal, which is freedom too. This is what Abraham Maslow would call self-actualization, which is that you are at the stage of freedom where you are being and doing and having as you choose, what you choose, how you choose, and you're living a life with agency and of choice and of freedom, of fear and of concern and of worry of what people think and how they're going to receive it. Then you can shift to that higher level of expressing rather than trying to impress. You can actually just live your higher level of purpose. And actually that hits right back to Dan Sullivan, which is his higher levels of freedom are, his highest level, you go from freedom of time, money, relationship to ultimately freedom of purpose. And over time, as you're expanding yourself, your sense of purpose will evolve dramatically to beautiful high levels where you become shocked at the future self you imagine. You become shocked at the purpose that drives you. And as Viktor Frankl would say, when the why is strong enough, you can bear anyhow, you can find anyhow. Purpose is really powerful. And as you continue to grow and be increasingly honest with yourself, stripping away the layers of the David, to use Michelangelo's language, and becoming more and more of who you genuinely want to be, your vision for yourself and your sense of purpose will begin to humble you dramatically. And you'll begin to focus on and expand on better and bigger and more important things, deeper value, better things. And you will truly be humbled by the purpose that drives you and by the purpose that gives your life meaning. So I hope that you take this seriously, and I hope that you start to let go and free yourself from worrying and striving to be consistent with the opinions or fears of those around you. You don't need to worry about that anymore. That is literally the primary thing stopping you from being who you most want to be, and from taking the steps that would then lead you to unfathomable places that you cannot currently imagine, which will expand you further and further. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I hope you enjoyed this. Please like this video so that more people can see it. Please subscribe to the channel. Down below are links to a few of the books I've written, as well as a peak state checklist to get yourself into a peak state every morning. Have a beautiful day. I will talk to you later.